Welcome to the Ghost Show online, my fiends, booze, and ghouls. Your hosts, Seika Groves, Rachel Benter, and Ian Russell will discuss all things paranormal. Prepare to be afraid.
So today's show, the Gothic horror novels, the Dracula, the Frankenstein, have you guys read those novels in their entirety ever?
I have, yes.
Bram
both of them.
Stoker's Dracula and I'm sorry, Ian.
That's okay.
Yes, Dracula and Frankenstein, yes, I have read both novels.
Yeah.
And have you read them too, Rachel?
Yes, I have. It was actually a mandatory reading as part of our English language class.
Nice.
Well, that is that's funny you say that, Rachel, because when I was in college, we had to take an English class, and that's exactly where I read them, was in this English college class. Yeah, it was part of the curriculum.
Right.
And
yes, it
it was very cool reading those books. It really was.
Yes. It was interesting. It was a definite eye opener, and I think it initiated my love of that Gothic horror, and the whole genre. And I'm glad that I had the opportunity to be able to read it. You know, even at that younger age, I had an appreciation for it. Yeah, I'm glad I did. But, you know, I think maybe it's time to pull it back out off the shelf and reread it again.
Yeah, I mean, they're great stories, right? And, you know, here's the thing a lot of people don't realize about these books, right? Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, is a lot of years between Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I mean, there's 80 years in the timeline of those books being written, because Mary Shelley wrote her book in 1818, and Bram Stoker didn't write his until 1897. So I find that really interesting that his novel is, you know, still today one of the go-tos for, you know, the real Dracula stories, and I think it's just the way it's done. But there's a real similarity between the two novels, and myself being a writer and writing a lot of, you know, these kinds of stories, these Gothic half Penny Dreadfuls and Penny Dreadfuls and things, you know, these horror sort of, none of my stories are, you know, they're all somewhat, you know, involving either murder or death or some sort of thing. I can appreciate the style in which these are written, and I'm not sure if you guys remember, but both of these novels were written from an epistolary format, right? So they're both written from a format where the narrators are the novel's protagonists, right? So they're writing letters and they're writing back and forth, you know, giving us, the reader, the narrative through these written accounts. And so both novels follow that. And that is something that I think there's probably some people still doing that today, but I find a lot of the stories now are written from a first-person account, right? That person is involved in the action or the situation. And so this is kind of an old way of writing this. And because in the Victorian era and in those times, they didn't have visuals, right? They didn't have television or radio even. So everything had to come from within one sort of, you know, mind, but also too, letter writing was a very common thing in those days. So setting your stories out through this method of, you know, creating it through letters or through accounts, written accounts, was really fairly easily digested by that, you know, those people in that era, right? It would have been a very easy way for people to understand a story, and to obviously give you an opportunity to come at it from a different perspective as well. But I really think maybe we should start with Frankenstein, because Mary Shelley, it was really sort of the progenitor of these kinds of stories. I did quite a bit of digging, and I mean, there's some kind of horror or gothic, sort of feel to some earlier stories, even in the late 1700s, but nothing to the extent of what she came out with. Nothing to that level of, being able to write a book that was. I'm going to ask you guys, like, how did you feel like when you read the story? Because for me, I felt really sorry for the monster in the story. Yeah. And there's so many situations today that we can still use that as a social commentary.
Oh my gosh. Oh.
Yeah, but I really felt very sorry for the creature in that. And like, Ian, when you read it, how did you feel about it? Do you remember how you felt in terms of the creature and the story itself? And
to be honest, it's been so long since I read it, because college was, what was it, 35 years ago.
Yeah, well, I know that feeling.
But as you say, the story being told from a narrative perspective, Frankenstein is an interesting piece of writing, because it's actually told from 3 different narrative perspectives.
That's right.
You've got the captain of the ship that's in the story. Of course, you've got Victor Frankenstein's point of view. And interesting, there's actually the Frankenstein monster's point of view in the story as well.
Right.
And did I feel sorry for the monster? I honestly can't remember, because I say it's been so long. But what I do remember is it did not take very long for me to become absorbed in this story. Sometimes, books, it'll take me half the book to be able to really get into it. And it only took a few pages, and I was just absorbed in this book and just read it cover to cover.
Yeah, it's. I found the same thing with it. I mean, it really is a very compelling story, and I think it has a lot of social commentary that is written into it as well. Even though we maybe today might not get it, but I don't know. I mean, I got it, and I've read the book more than once. I think I've probably read it about 4 or 5 times now.
I related to the creature. I mean, Adam, or I related to it because I wasn't always accepted in society. People don't always, people can be very judgmental. And they're very judgmental with the creature. They judge him instantly. That sort of thing, and he terrified people for obvious reasons. So, I thought it was very clever.
Yeah, and I mean, like Ian said, being written from 3 different narratives makes it really interesting, because you are getting this feeling of, listening to that person at that moment. So even the creature, like you feel like you're, listening to his plight and his dilemma, and it does kind of, and the other thing I think that was really smart with Mary Shelley is, let's face it, this is a woman in 1818, and she's a young woman when she writes this, right? This is, she's a very young woman when this book is written. It supposedly came from a dream, I believe, was what she had, but she was only 20 at the time. But the one thing that she was able to do in her book was to really capture some of her travels, right? So when she went to Europe, she had extensively traveled and went to Switzerland and Germany and all of these places where they have these big old Gothic castles. And she was really able to bring that into the story and make it believable, because I think what happens is that when you watch a film or you watch, some representations of the story, you don't really get the full picture of where this starts and where it ends up, right? It sort of feels like everything just gets concentrated into Frankenstein's lab, and then the monster goes crazy, and that's sort of the end of the story. But you don't really get the full understanding of, how much she pulled into the novel in terms of her own travel and her own abilities to recant some of the things that she saw as part of the story and as part of the narrative. So I find that really interesting from, a young woman at the age of 20. And I mean, 20 in 1818 was more like 35 today, right? In terms of the way that your mentality was. 20, most women were often married and already had a family. So, the fact that she came from a family that gave her the ability to be able to travel and do these things, I think makes really shows in her story and the way that she wrote it. But the character itself, now I'm going to ask you, and I don't know if you've seen, but there is a play version of Frankenstein. And I don't know if anybody has seen it. I've only seen it on TV. I'm going to say I actually watched the one where Johnny Lee Miller and Benedict Cumberbatch both played. One played the creature, one played Frankenstein, and then they swapped the roles. And then the other played. Oh, it's phenomenal. And
that sounds great. I would love to watch.
I think you can watch it. It's like a BBC. Just go online and type them in and put Frankenstein and their names, and you'll pull it up. It was done maybe 10 years ago, something like that. But it's brilliantly done. They're both excellent in the role. And I think that I ended up preferring Johnny Lee Miller as Frankenstein over Benedict Cumberbatch. I just preferred his performance as the creature. They're both really good, but I thought Benedict was a better Frankenstein and Johnny was a better monster. And that's just my personal opinion, but I think that he brought so many more subtleties. Although Cumberbatch did an amazing job, I found Johnny's creature more I guess I want to say I sympathized with it more. So just his performance in terms of the creature, I felt more drawn to it. But both really excellent performances, done brilliantly on stage and really well done. So the way that they staged it and the script and everything too was brilliant, and they really stuck to the novel. They didn't go off on any modern tangents with it. So it was very, very well done. But if you catch that, it's worth watching. But they did stick to the story, and I think that that's what makes these stories, sort of stick out. And without having read them yesterday, literally, there's some things that, of course, would be lost, in trying to remember what happened. But I was always struck by the creature. And did you guys ever watch Penny Dreadful, the TV series?
No.
No?
You talked about it when we did the Penny Dreadfuls episode on the podcast.
Right.
And
now,
something about it.
Yeah, and I wasn't a huge fan of the show. The first season I did enjoy. It kind of just, like some of those shows, they have the best of intentions, but they don't have the script writers. And so it just, visually it looked really cool, and it looked like it should have went somewhere more than it ever did. But they introduced a character by the name of John Clare. And John Clare, if maybe you are familiar or not familiar, was a poet in Victorian times. And a very, very good poet. But they made him Frankenstein's monster. So they gave him the name of John Clare. He, it wasn't that it was John Clare as Frankenstein, but the creature had took the name John Clare. But the creature also, too, had a very soft side and loved poetry So it was very almost Phantom of the Opera meets Frankenstein's monster but it was my favorite character on the entire show.
Well, I've not seen the play you were talking about. I'm more of a cinema kind of person. Mm-hmm. And, of course, there's been a million Frankenstein movies produced.
There has.
Over the years, from Universal Studios and the old British Hammer horror films. Mm-hmm. There's a 1994 version of Frankenstein that starred Robert De Niro as the monster. And this movie is actually considered to be the most accurate adaptation of a film from the book. And it's actually one of my favorite films of Frankenstein. And unfortunately, though, other than myself, I guess a lot of other people didn't like it because it did not do well at the box office.
Okay.
But, it's, in my opinion, it is the best version I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah, I'm just looking it up. So Kenneth Branagh was the director on it, and it had Helena Bonham Carter, Tom Holtz. Yeah. So, Robert De Niro. Interesting cast. Not one that I would readily go, Like, I can see Helena Bonham Carter and Kenneth Branagh together, but then you introduce Tom Holtz, who, of course, most people would know as Amadeus in the film Amadeus. Brilliant actor, but didn't do a whole lot after that. And then you kind of got De Niro as the monster, which I guess I don't know. Maybe I'll have to check it out just to see. His
performance is really good.
Okay, I'll have to watch
it. It's fantastic, in my opinion.
Okay, I'll check it out. I've not even seen that version, so, and that's why I love this show. Because we get introduced to things that we haven't seen or talked about previously, and that, that's the beauty of having more than one person, right? Is that we can, Right. Rachel, do you have sort of a favorite version? Like, do you prefer the book? Have you seen movies? Have you?
Of Frankenstein?
Like Frankenstein films, yeah.
I like the play.
I love the play too.
It was a long time ago that I saw the play, but yes, I like the play.
The play is very well done, I have to admit, right? It's pretty cool. So I'm looking right now, because Ian had brought up about films, so I'm looking at a list of films that have had Frankenstein's monster in them. So are you guys ready for this? Because it's pretty extensive, and I kind of want to go down the whole list. Okay, so some of them are actual movies, some it's just an appearance, right? So we have in 1910 an actual film, Frankenstein. And then, so that obviously was black and white, 1910 horror film, directed by J. Searle Dawley, Dawley, that's his name. It was a one-reeler screenplay that they brought to the screen. So very cool. Oh, and I have seen this creature before. So interesting. It was featured on the cover of Edison's Kinetogram in March 15th, 1910. So there's an oldie for you. That's the first appearance. So that's just a little under 100 years later. And then we have Life with Soul in 1915, The Monster of Frankenstein in 1920, Frankenstein in 1931. And, of course, we are all familiar with that one because that is Boris Karloff, right?
Right.
So,
right. And squared off head, and the two bolts sticking out of his neck. Yeah. That's
it. And that really, I think, was the movie that propelled Frankenstein into the the culture, like into pop culture, if you want to, right? Was his version of Frankenstein. We have Mickey's Gala Premiere, so a Mickey Mouse cartoon. in 1933. Toyland premiere, also Bride of Frankenstein, of course, which, how can we not love the old Bride of Frankenstein? There's a number of cartoons, Hollywood Capers, Have You Got Any Castles? Then they did Son of Frankenstein in 1939. So this is where we're seeing now this. Remember, I was talking earlier about horror films. You start to get the spin-offs, right, and the multiples. So we've got Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, and then Son of Frankenstein. Then Hell's a Poppin', of course, in 1941, which was a bizarrely strange and awesome film. The Ghost of Frankenstein, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, because, you got to have those
crossovers. Yeah.
That was the crossover. House of Frankenstein, which was, again, Boris Karloff and Lon Chaney. And then House of Dracula. So now we're bringing them all into it, right? You've got Dracula, you've got Wolfman, you've got Frankenstein. So you had them all in there. And that was, the cast of everybody that was popular at the time. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which was 1948. That was funny. It was fun. The Curse of Frankenstein, which was a British Hammer horror film in 1957. I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, which, of course, apparently it was a double feature that played in 1957 with Blood of Dracula, and the follow-up, which was I Was a Teenage Werewolf, which again became another, sort of remake. Frankenstein 1970, which is weirdly a 1958 science fiction horror film starring Boris Karloff. So we can see that throughout, the course of history since the novels come out, it has certainly taken on a life of its own, literally and figuratively. The monster has been reborn many, many times. But I want to ask you guys, like, when you read the book, because Ian, you said, and it really was one of those books where you started to read it and you just got really pulled in. Do you remember anything that really stands out for you in the novel? Like, was there part of it that you were reading it and you were just like, oh my God, and you still remember it today? Like,
just the story itself. I don't know what it was about it.
Part where the creature asks to be, asked for a partner, and he wants a female friend, and doesn't want to be alone anymore.
Yeah, that was an interesting one too. But what I think strikes me most about the novel, and in some subsequent films that I've watched, but mostly the novel, because this is really, for me, where I was most interested in it. I find that many others that have followed have kind of let me down, in terms of the visuals. But it was really the description of Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory, that intrigued me the most. And I don't know if it's because of my, my science-based mind, but I often imagined, what it would be like going back to those times when we sort of take it for granted now, right? Electricity and all of these things that we have, these modern conveniences, but to a time where this was just really new, right? So, Mary Shelley's playing on that whole, Benjamin Franklin kite string, lightning strikes, and the key, and, those kinds of things that today we take for granted, I guess, because, we just have to switch on our light switch, right? and we have electricity. But back then, it was really like a conjuring art. I don't know. I think that's what fascinated me, was the harnessing of the lightning and the ability to, turn that lightning into something that was life-giving instead of life-taking. It was, and the laboratory itself, and the, sort of the concept of being able to stitch together multiple bodies to get them to work, and then to use this electricity to essentially, get the heart beating again and the blood flowing again. And there's so many little things in her story that make me think that, she was 100 years ahead of her time in her mind for what was actually happening. Yeah.
And the whole science thing, and the whole using, parts from dead bodies to and reanimating them, is still a conversation we're having today.
Yes, it is. Exactly. I mean, it's kind of it's somewhat mind-boggling, right? And that's what I say. There's so many things here that her story touched on that are still very prevalent today in slightly different ways. But the fact that we can now essentially put somebody else's heart into another body, or somebody else's lungs or eyes, or attach another arm or a hand, or reattach fingers. Like, there's just that and I think what was so shocking about her novel in that time was, being a very predominantly Christian society, what she was putting out there was playing God, essentially, in the eyes of a lot of people, right? Science was playing God. And so I think that it was shocking to a lot of people in that respect, too, that it was, it horrified them in more ways than just reanimating this creature and having it rampage around the countryside. And in reality, like I said, I felt sorry for the creature, because it would be a bit like having amnesia and not knowing where you are and not knowing who you are. And imagine yourself in a place where you know nobody and you look different from them. Right? So
yeah,
even today.
That's what I feel that I can relate with, yeah.
Yeah, I find that...
It's relatable in some context.
Yeah, and at the age of 20 that she was able to conceive all of these things.
Thank you for watching The Ghost Show Online. Join your hosts again next week as they discuss more tales of the supernatural, the paranormal, and all things spectacular. See you soon.